Good morning, everybody. We are going to go back to the Mishnah on Daf Chof Tes Amud Aleph at the bottom of the Amud, and we're going to start from here. So the Mishnah
What page in English?
It's 29a4, the Mishnah.
Thank you.
So Mishnah says Rosh Chodesh Adar shechol liyes b'Shabbos, when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Shabbos. So now there are four portions that we read around the time of Purim. That's why it's in the tractate of Megilla. What are the four parshas? There's Parshas Shkolim, Parshas Zachar, Parshas Para, and Parshas HaChodesh. And these four portions are read somewhere around Purim. So we start with the first one, which is Parshas Shkolim. When do we read it? So the Gemara, the Mishnah lays out the first scenario where Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos itself. So then what we do? Koirin Parshas Shkolim. We read in the synagogue as part of the regular Torah reading the portion of Shkolim. At this point, it is the assumption that instead of reading another parsha, the Parshas Hashavua, the portion of that week, we substitute it, we replace it with Parshas Shkolim. And that's the only thing we would be reading that Shabbos. So Shabbos Rosh Chodesh would be reading Parshas Shkolim. If Rosh Chodesh fell within the week, then Makdimin l'Sha'ava, we advance the Shkolim reading to the previous Shabbos, which would be the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, and that's when we would read Parshas Shkolim. Umafsikin l'Shabbos acheres, and then interrupt the reading of the four portions on the next Shabbos. Right? Why? Because we want to have Parshas Zachar right next to Purim, so therefore that's not going to work because Purim is on the 14th. So we would have to skip a Shabbos, and then the following Shabbos would be Shabbos Zachar. So that's what the Mishnah continues. Bashnia Zachar, on the second Shabbos of the times that we read, one of the four parshas would be Parshas Zachar. Bashlishis Paraduma, on the third Shabbos you read Paraduma, and Beravias, and on the fourth Shabbos, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, we read the portion of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, which is in Parshas Boy. So now, Bechamishis, once you get to the fifth week, then Chayzrin Lechesidron, then we're going to resume with the regular order of the regular Parsha of the week. We go back to the regular Parsha of the week. So that's that. Now, one second. Now, Lakol Mafsikin, for all the festivals we interrupt the reading of the regular Shabbos or weekday portion, and what we do is we read instead a portion that is related to the Yom Tov. Right? One second. B'Rosh Chodoshim, one also interrupts the regular reading on Rosh Chodesh days, b'Chanukah and on Chanukah, u'Purim and on Purim, b'Tainis on fast days, u'Mamodos and on the Mamodos. As we've explained, the Mamodos are the special days that a group of people had their turn to read special portions from Bereshis, right? Each day of the week, another portion of the creation of the world, and they would do that for the time that it was their turn. So instead of reading the regular portion of the week, they would read the portion from the creation of the world, which is in Parshas Bereshis. And likewise, on Yom Kippurim, instead of reading, let's say it falls out on Shabbos, so instead of reading the regular Shabbos Torah reading, whether it's Hazinu or whatever, instead of reading Hazinu, that Shabbos you would read the reading for Yom Kippur. So there we have it. So let's review the Mishnah for a moment. When Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, then we read Parshas Shkolim on Shabbos, on that Shabbos, right? That would be the first Shabbos of the month of Adar. If Rosh Chodesh falls in the middle of the week, then we read it in the last Shabbos of the month of Shvat, which means the Shabbos right before Adar. Then we're going to skip to the week, the Shabbos just prior to Purim, and that's when we read Parshas Zachar. Then the next week we would read Parshas Para, and the next week we would read Parshas HaChodesh. Now, we say that after those 4 weeks, or after those 4 portions have been read, we then go back to the regular order of reading the Parshat HaShavua, the regular Torah portion for that week. Then the last thing we said was, in all instances, when you have a Yom Tov, or you have Rosh Chodesh, or Chanukah, or Purim, or a fast day, or the Mamodos, instead of reading the regular Parshat HaShavua, the portion of that week, you read these portions that are related to the current time, the festival of that time, instead of the regular Parshat HaShavua. That's the Mishnah. Okay, so far so good? Okay, so now the Gemara says, Tanan Hosam, we learned elsewhere in the Mishnah, this is in Parshat Shkolim, that Be'echad Ba'adar Mashmin ala Shkolim. On the first day of Adar, the Beis Din would announce about the tax of the Shkolim, right? Now, what is, and then the Mishnah over there continues and says, Va'ala Kilayim. The other thing they would call out, the Beis Din would make announcements about, is about Kilayim. Kilayim is a prohibition to plant different species of vegetables to, and planting grains, seeds or vegetables in a vineyard. These things are forbidden, and what the Beis Din would do is they would remind everybody not to allow for these growths to take place in their fields. So now, the Gemara asks as follows. With regards to the Mishnah that we just quoted from Shkolim, I can understand why the Beis Din would remind everybody about the Kilayim, this prohibition of the things growing together, this Manzriyahu, because Adar is a time of planting, of sowing. Now, although Adar is not really the time of planting, but what it means is it's the end of the time of planting, and now you're going to start seeing the beginning of the growth of whatever you've planted. And if you see that inadvertently 2 things grew together, you can immediately uproot it. That's why at this time of the year, in Adar, they would already tell everybody to to be careful about Kilayim. Elo ala Shkolim, but with regards to what the Mishnah had said, that the Beis Din go about announcing about the Shkolim that everybody needs to contribute for the Karbonos Minalan. From where do we know? In other words, from where do we know that for the Beis Din, Adar, Rosh Chodesh Adar is the fitting time to do this? Why do it so early? Why do it on Rosh Chodesh Adar? So the answer we give is as follows. The answer is Amar Rav Tavi Amar Rabbi Yeshia. Rav Tavi says in the name of Rabbi Yeshia, the Amar Kara, because as it says in the pasuk, Zeis Oilas Chodesh B'Chodshai. This is the Oila offering of the new month at its renewal. So, since you have this repetition of Chodesh and Chodshai, which are all terms of renewal, Amra Torah, the Torah thereby says, Chadesh v'havei korban mitruma chadasha. What the pasuk is really trying to tell us is that we should renew a month by bringing the offering from a new separation, which means as follows. The biblical year, the calendar, according to the Torah, begins in Nisan. And so, when we're speaking about the karbonos that are going to be brought up, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they should be brought from a new offering, from the new monies, not from monies from last year, but new monies that were collected specifically for this upcoming year. So that's where Rav Tavi says in the name of Rabbi Yeshia, this is where the Chachamim knew that the Beis Din are supposed to go out and remind everybody already in Adar to start contributing towards the money that's going to be used to purchase these karbonos for the following year, meaning from beginning of Nisan. Since Nisan, we need to offer the money from the new tax, from the new levy that they go around collecting. So therefore, we start to read the portion of Shkolim which discusses about giving the Machzos HaShekel, and we read it on the first of Adar. In order that they should bring these shkolim to the Beis Hamikdash. So that's why we do it. In other words, it's a responsibility of the Beis Din, right, to go out and to remind people about things that are extremely important in terms of their observances. Now, one of the things they would do is they would send out shluchim to go out, messengers, agents, to tell everybody about the kilayim and also about collecting the machzis hashekel. In addition to that, every synagogue would read from Parsha Shekalim on the Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, or the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Adar, also to educate people and to remind people that they need to bring this new tax to the Beis Hamikdash. Okay? So far, so good. Now, a month in advance is something that is usually the time frame that's given by the Chachamim for when you need to start learning. So, for example, 30 days before Rosh Hashanah is a good time to start learning the laws of Rosh Hashanah, whether it's the laws of Shofar or whatever it might be. Likewise, on the 15th of Elul would be a good time to start learning the laws of Sukkot, right? 30 days before the Yom Tov. However, the Gemara asks, come on, according to who do we say that 30 days before, meaning Rosh Chodesh Adar, you should start reading about the Shkalim, which needs to be given before Rosh Chodesh Nisan? To like Reb Shimon Gamliel, it's not going to be in accordance with Reb Shimon Gamliel, the Reb Shimon Gamliel, because if you're going to say that it's in accordance with the view of Reb Shimon Gamliel, since he says that you only need 2 weeks, right? Where do we see this? The Tanya, as it was torn in a brisa, the brisa says that we ask and we inquire and discuss the laws of Hilchas Pesach before Pesach, 30 days in advance of Pesach, and there it says in that brisa, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says Shtei Shabbos, that it's the time frame is only 2 weeks. So therefore, if we're saying that you should read it Rosh Chodesh Adar, right, or the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Adar, that's more than 2 weeks in advance. So therefore, the opinion of this Mishnah cannot be in accordance with Reb Shimon Gamliel. That's what we're asking, or that's what we're assuming. So the Gemara turns around and says, no, we could even have this Mishnah in accordance with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Afilu tema, you could even say Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, that it goes in accordance with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Given the Amama, since the Mishnah has already said, since we've learned before, that Bechamisha also by Shulchonesh Yeshrim B'Medina, that on the 15th day of Adar, the money changers. What do we need money changers for? They would sit in the province in order to change people's money into half shekels. Not everybody had, you have people, they have $20. You have change of $20, I need 4 5s, right? So not everybody has the exact money, the exact change. And in order to give a machzah shekel, they would go to the money changers and they would ask them for change to be able to bring these half shekels. So when would these money changers start sitting out ready to change the half shekels? They would start doing that on the 15th day of the month of Adar. And over there, the Mishnah says that on the 25th day they would sit somewhere on the Temple Mount by the Beis Hamikdash, right? Because they want people to realize that time is running out. So on the 25th, they would move from where they were in Yerushalayim, and they would move closer to the Beis Hamikdash, so that people would realize, hey, you better hurry up because soon they're going to come after. They're going to come after you. Meaning the people who would enforce the taxes would come, and they could coerce you to give them money. So therefore, they would move to tell people that time has moved on. But either way, what comes out of this is that on the 15th day, the money changers would be sitting there. If it's on the 15th, that they would be sitting there, because the money changers were already there on the 15th. That's why we would precede them by 2 weeks and read the portion of Shekalim, and that would fit with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who says you only need to read it 2 weeks prior to when it's relevant. And since it becomes very relevant on the 15th when the money changers are already sitting outside, therefore it makes sense, even according to him, to read Parsha Shekalim when? On Rosh Chodesh Adar, or the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Adar.
Rabbi,
yes,
it's interesting that there are other religions, I don't want to say which one, that makes a big deal about how terrible it is that the money changers are in the temple. In other words, to make it sound like the Jewish religion was all about business and money, that there are money changers. But here we're seeing that the money changers were a necessity
Absolutely.
in order to bring the korbanos.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now, moving on to the next part of the Gemara, this is where we started to get a little bit stuck. And so therefore, I want to go a little bit slower, and hopefully everybody can follow along. Okay? Asks the Gemara, my Parsha Shkolim. We'll be talking about reading Shkolim on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh or the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. But what is Parsha Shkolim? In other words, which section of the Torah constitutes Parsha Shkolim? So there's a machlekes. There are two opinions, okay? And here I'm going to share something. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So we've got, 1 second. Just need to move this down over here. Okay. So we've got two views. One view is, the first view is, so Rav says, Tzav es b'nei Yisrael v'amarta aleim es karbani lachmi. He says that we read this portion over here. So you see, Parshas Pinchas, it starts from Vayidab Hashem el Moshe leimar, Tzav es b'nei Yisrael v'amarta aleim es karbani lachmi, which talks about the daily sacrifices that were brought up every day, and then after that it talks about the sacrifices of Shabbos, and after that it talks about Rosh Chodshechem, it talks about Rosh Chodesh. This is actually the Torah reading that we read every Rosh Chodesh. So what is Parshas Shkolim? So Rav says it's this portion of the Korban Talmud, this portion from Parshas Pinchas that we read as Parshas Shkolim. Okay, now Shmuel says that what? No, Kisisa. We read Kisisa. So if you see over here, after Tetzaveh comes Kisisa, and over here in Kisisa, at the beginning of Kisisa, it says Kisisa Resh Bnei Yisrael Lefkudehem V'Nosnu Ish Keif Nafshay, and they would. This is what they would do. Zayitnu. This is what everybody would give. Kol Ha'over Alapkut Machzis HaShekel. They would give the half a shekel. So this is the portion that they would read as Parshas Shkolim. Okay, so we've got the Korban, the Parshas Talmud, and we've got Parshas Kisisa. Rav says it's the Parsha from Pinchas, and Shmuel says it's the Parsha of Parshas Kisisa. And I'm going to refer to them as Parshas Pinchas and Kisisa, just so that it's easier to follow, okay? Pinchas or Kisisa. Okay, so now I'm going to stop the share, and I'll share it again when we need it, okay? Now, all is well. It's understandable when we refer to the opinion of Shmuel, who says that Parshas Shkolim is Kisisa. Hainu de Karila Parshas Shkolim. It's understandable why you call it Parshas Shkolim. Tichsiv Bar Shkolim, because it speaks over there about Shkolim. It speaks about Machzis HaShekel. So I understand why you would call it Parshas Shkolim. The one who says that you read from Parshas Pinchas, over there, if you read through that section, our shkolim at all mentioned over there, it just talks about the daily sacrifices. It doesn't mention anything about money. So why would you call it Parshas Shkolim? So this is a question on Rav. Okay, Rav says we read Parshas Pinchas, and yet we're calling it Parshas Shkolim when there's no mention of money at all. Okay, that's the question. Answers the Gemara in yes, it is still appropriately called the portion of Shkolim. Why? Time amai, what's the reason? Because of Rev Tavi. What does Rev Tavi say? Rev Tavi said that what? We mentioned him before, that he says that the mitzvah to contribute the half shkolim in Adar is in order to offer up the public sacrifices. So therefore, when we read Parshas Pinchas, which talks about the sacrifices, it's called Parshas Shkolim because that is the whole purpose for which the shkolim are given. So therefore, it is a good reminder, and we call it Parshas Shkolim, so that when everybody reads the portion about the daily sacrifices, and we're calling it Parsha Shkalim, it will remind them that we have to give the Shkalim to be able to purchase these sacrifices. So that's why it still makes sense to call it Shkalim, because these two are very closely related, right? We give the Shkalim in order to bring up the daily sacrifices. So now that we've asked a question on Rav and we've answered it, now we turn to Shmuel and we question him. It's understandable why you would read Parsha Shkalim from Parshas Pinchas. Why? Mishum diksivi karbanos hasam. Because over there it speaks about the public offerings that we're obligated to give, Kidder Rav Tavi. And as Rav Tavi says, that we give the Shkalim, we give the money in order to purchase these sacrifices. So now I understand, it makes very, very, very much sense to talk about Parsha Shkalim being read from Parshas Pinchas. But according to you, Shmuel, who say we read from Parshas Kisisa, and it talks over there about the Maxis HaShekel, but it does talk about Maxis HaShekel. But Karbonis Miksivi, does it talk about Maxis HaShekel that's going to be used for the Karbonis, for the offerings? It's Shkalim Ladonim Ksiv. Over there in Parshas Kisisa, when it talks about offering a Maxis HaShekel, that Maxis HaShekel over there was used in order to purchase these silver sockets in which you would place the beams, which would hold up the whole tabernacle, which would hold up the whole Mishkan, right? So therefore, what is the point of reading Parsha Shkalim on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar in order to remind people that they need to give a contribution to be able to buy the sacrifices, by reading a portion which talks about a contribution that was given to purchase the Adonim, to purchase the sockets, not the sacrifices? You understand the question? That's the question on Shmuel. It seems to be unrelated. Answers the Gemara, Kedertani Rav Yosef. It's in accordance with a brisa that was taught by Rav Yosef. In other words, what we're saying is that although it is true, the Maxis HaShekel went to the Adonim, but we read in the portion over there that there are 3 trumos. There are actually 3 offerings, 3 separations that were made, and they would take these monies and use them for different things. So one was used, Shel Mizbeach LeMizbeach, the contribution that was made for the Mizbeach, which means for the sacrifices, that money went to the sacrifices. V'shel Adonim LaAdonim, and the contribution of Maxis HaShekel that went for the bases were used for the bases. V'shel Bedek HaBayis LeBedek HaBayis, and the third contribution that was used for the maintenance of the Beis Hamikdash or the Mishkan, so that was used for that. But either way, by reading Parsha Shkalim, when we mention about an offering of a Maxis HaShekel, it still relates to the offerings that were made for the Mizbeach, meaning the Karbanos. So therefore, we've answered the question against Shmuel. Okay?
Yeah,
yes.
It was used for a tax, basically. Is that correct? For the tabernacle?
Correct. It's for a tax. Now that we've answered the question on Shmuel, we turn back our attention to Rav, and we question Rav again. It's understandable. Everything makes sense when we go with the opinion of Shmuel, who says that for Parshas Shkolim we read from Parshas Kisisa. Why? This is how the Torah reading on the Shabbos Rosh Chodesh of Adar would differ from the Shabbos of all other Rosh Chodeshim, right? Why? Because every Shabbos Rosh Chodesh you're going to read from Parshas Pinchas. Now, if you're going to designate a Shabbos Shkolim, and you're just going to read the same portion that you read on every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, what kind of distinction or demarcation are you going to have that this is actually Shabbos Shkolim? People are just going to assume that we're reading the portion of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. What's the problem with that? Well, how are you going to remind them through the Torah reading that they have to bring the karbanos? They have to bring the money for the new karbanos that they're going to bring in Nisan. So according to Shmuel, it's all fine. Why? Because on Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh Adar, you're going to read from Kisisa, and that's going to be a good reminder, right? That they should bring their shkolim, because this is not something that we read every Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. The Shabbos Rosh Chodesh is very different. But according to Rav, who says that we read from Parshas Pinchas, my shani, what's going to be different this Shabbos Rosh Chodesh from all other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh where we read the same portion? So the Gemara answers, shani, there is going to be a difference this Shabbos Rosh Chodesh versus every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Why? Okay. The ilu Roshei Chodoshim karu shita b'inyan diyema, because on another Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, the way they would divide the reading of the Torah is as follows: 6 people would be called up to read from the current portion, right? Meaning the Parshas HaShavua, v'chad b'Rosh Chodesh, and another person was going to be called up for who to read the portion of Rosh Chodesh. Now, this goes with the assumption that when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, we still read the regular portion of the week. That doesn't seem to be what our Mishnah implied. If you go back to the Mishnah for 10 seconds, right? The Mishnah had said that on all festivals, we interrupt the reading of the regular Shabbos. On Rosh Chodesh, we would interrupt and replace it with Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, Purim, and so on and so forth, right? Here, what we're saying is that there's a different opinion. The opinion is that when Shabbos falls out, when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, we still read the regular portion of the week. The only thing is that instead of calling up 7 people just to read the portion of the week, we call up 6 people to read the portion of the week. And the 7th person who gets an aliyah on Shabbos is going to be called up to read the portion of Rosh Chodesh. So according to this, we're going to now understand very well how even according to Rav, there's going to be a difference. Why? Because what's going to change is as follows. On Rosh Chodesh, that falls out on a regular Shabbos, we read the Parshas HaShavua, and one guy reads for Rosh Chodesh. V'ilu ha'idna. But now when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, kulu b'Rosh Chodesh, what's going to happen is that you're going to read the whole Parsha of Rosh Chodesh. What does that mean? This is where I got stuck yesterday, okay? What this means is that instead of reading the whole of the normal Parshas HaShavua and only at the end reading about Rosh Chodesh, here what's going to happen, because it's Parshas Shkolim, you're going to, according to Rav, read from Parshas Pinchas. That's the only thing you're going to be reading, and everybody's going to notice that while ordinarily we would read the Parshas HaShavua and Rosh Chodesh, because today is Shabbos Shkolim, instead of reading the Parshas HaShavua, we're going to read the whole Parsha of Pinchas, which has the portion of Rosh Chodesh. Now, this, as I just explained, only works well if you say that ordinarily on a regular Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, you still read the Parshas HaShavua. That's what the Gemara now says. This explanation of Rav works well, Leman da'ama, according to the opinion that says, let's say that Parshas Uchoyzeh, that after the 4 portions have been read, we return to the regular order of the Torah, right? Which means to say that when it comes to the 4 portions, it's the 4 portions that supersede the Shabbos reading and not Rosh Chodesh, right? And so therefore, on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, the only thing we would be reading is from Parshas Pinchas. However, according to the one who maintains that we return only to the order of the Haftarahs or Parshasa Diyema Karinan, but we still do read the current weekly portions on the Shabbos of the 4 Parshios, then my Shani, what is the difference? In other words, if I'm going to say that on the week of Parsha Shkolim, I'm still going to read the Parsha Shavua, then everything that Rav says doesn't count. The explanation that we just gave for Rav, who says that that we read only from Parshas Pinchas and Parshas Shkolim, that works according to the one who says that we stop reading the Parshas Hashavua for Parshas Shkolim, Parshas Zachar, Parshas Para, and Parshas HaKodesh. But according to the opinion, it says that we don't stop reading the regular Parsha for those weeks. The only thing that changes is the Haftorahs of that week. We won't read the regular Haftorah for that week. We'd read that special Haftorah for one of the 4 portions that we're reading. So then how would Rav come along and explain the difference between this Shabbos Rosh Chodesh and every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh? Before I go to the answer, I want to make sure everybody understood the question. Are we all on the same page? Yes.
Yes. Well, something related to this. Well, it seems like back then, like if back then they had so many preemptions of the weekly Sedra, not just say like for Sukkot, of Shabbos, Shabbos, Pesach.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to the different customs of back then. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands the argument over here. The argument is that we're asking Rav for an explanation how Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, when Parsha Shkolim falls out on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, how would the reading be different than a regular Shabbos Rosh Chodesh if you're going to end up reading the same portion? So he tried to say that it would be different because on a regular Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, you wouldn't replace the regular Torah reading for that week with the Parshas Pinchas. You would just add Parshas Pinchas at the end, whereas when it's Shabbos Shkolim, it's completely replaced with Parshas Pinchas. So we're asking Rav, that's only according to the person who says that we halt reading the regular portion of the week during the 4 portions. However, according to the one who says the only thing that halts is the reading of the Haftorah, but the reading of the regular Parsha, the regular Sedra, still continues, and so therefore Parsha Shkolim would only be read at the end of the reading of the Torah Parsha. That would be exactly as every other Rosh Chodesh. In which case, what kind of a difference would there be between Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, where you're going to be reading Shabbos Shkolim, and every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, where you also read from Parshas Pinchas? That's the question. Any questions?
Yeah, Rabbi?
Yep.
When you said that they read the whole Parsha of Pinchas, are you talking about just the Parsha for that we say by Moshe?
Yes. Yes,
okay.
just Chamishi, just Vayidaber.
Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
other passages from Bamidbar?
What do you mean?
Aren't there passages that are read from Bamidbar that actually explain the sacrifices and things like that?
Yeah, so that's Parshas Pinchas. Parshas Pinchas is in.
Yeah, right. But aren't there other passages as well from other?
Right, but what I'm saying is every Rosh Chodesh we read from Parshas Pinchas, and according to Rav, on Shabbos Shkolim, right, we'd also read Parshas Pinchas, right? In which case, how would we know when Shabbos Rosh Chodesh is Parshas Shkolim? How would we know that it's Parshas Shkolim if we're just reading the same as every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh? We're reading the same portion. And for the Gemara, so the Gemara answers, Shani, even in that case, it's still different. In other words, even when you have the opinion that says that you still read the regular Sedra, the regular portion of the week, it's still going to be different when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos in Adar. Why? Because on all other regular Rosh Chodashim, you start reading the first 6 of that week's portion. You call up 6 people to finish that parsha, and then v'chad kari b'Rosh Chodesh, and then only one person would read the portion of Rosh Chodesh. However, ve'ilu ha'idna. Now, according to Rav, this is now when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos. what you're going to do is you're going to split it up very different. Karu Tlasa, you're going to call up 3 people, Binyana Diyama, to read the Torah portion of that week. So you're going to split the whole Torah portion of that week into 3. Cain gets the first part, the Levi gets the second part, and Yisrael gets the third part. And the 4 aliyahs left over, Va'arba, Karu B'Rosh Chodesh, and the 4 left over will be called up for the Rosh Chodesh reading. Because if you remember that we learned this before, that 4 people are called up for Rosh Chodesh. So in order to make a distinction between a regular Shabbos Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, where we're going to read Parsha Shkalim, instead of having 6 people called up for the Sedra and only 1 person called up for Rosh Chodesh, this time we're going to have 3 people called up for the whole Parsha, and then 4 people are going to be called up for the Rosh Chodesh reading, and people are going to ask, what's the difference? Why are we doing it this way? And they're going to be told, because this week is Parsha Shkalim, don't forget to bring your money for the Karbonis.
Rabbi,
Not on Shabbat.
Huh?
Not on Shabbat.
Not on Shabbat, but they're going to be reminded that we're in the time of the year where we need to remember our pledges, our commitments, our taxes to for the Karbonis, right?
Rabbi.
Yeah.
The Shabbos before, if Rosh Chodesh fall on Shabbos, you have to read the Shabbos before.
That's correct.
So on that Shabbos before, do you read it from Vayidaber also, the whole Pinkus?
No, so according to Rav, right? According to Rav, you still read from Pinchas. There are 2 opinions as to whether one opinion is that you just read Parshas Pinchas. The other opinion is that you read the regular portion of the week, and at the end you read from Parshas Pinchas, and that wouldn't be a conflict because it's not Rosh Chodesh. And people would ask, why are we reading this?
What are we reading Rosh Chodesh for?
Because what are we reading it? So they'll be told that it's Parshas Shkalim. So that would be fine. Okay. So now, further challenging Rav, Meisvei, they challenge Rav from the following Baraisa. It says as follows: Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechol Yis b'Shabbos. When Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Shabbos, Kairin beParsha Shkalim, we read the portion of Shkalim, right? Umaftirin beYehoyada HaKohen, and we conclude with the reading of the Haftarah from the passage about Yehoyada HaKohen, in which he goes and asks people to make contributions for the Beis Hamikdash. Now, here's the thing. When you say the Parshas Shkalim refers to Parshas Kisisa, like Shmuel says, that's why we read the Haftarah of Yehoyada HaKohen. We know there's a principle that because of the Gezeres, because of the decree against reading from the Torah, the rabbis instituted to read from the Haftarah, but the Haftarah was always going to be very similar to the portion of the week so that people would remember the content of that portion of the week. So if you're saying that there's a special Haftarah for Parshas Shkalim because there was a time where you couldn't read from the Torah, you had to read only from the Haftarah, and from the Haftarah from the Nevi'im. So you want to read something in the Maftir that is going to be similar to the Torah reading. So now, if you say that Parshas Shkalim is from Kisisa, which talks about Machzis HaShekel, so then I understand why we would read the Haftarah from Yehoyada HaKohen, where over there he's asking for money. The Domile, because the passage about Yehoyada HaKohen, right, is similar to Machzis HaShekel, Dichsiv, because it says in the passage about Yehoyada, it says Kesev Nafshis Erkoi, the money of his valuation of persons, which is what they would really tax the people to bring in to help with the Beis Hamikdash. But the Laman, the Oma, according to you, Rav, the Oma is Karbani Lachmi that we read on Parshas Shkalim, Parshas Pinchas, mi Dami, is this Haftarah about Yehoyada HaKohen and the collecting of the money similar to the portion about the Karbonis? And for the Gemara, so the Gemara answers, Dami, it is actually similar. Kid Rav Tavi, just as Rav Tavi had explained before, that the whole idea of reading in Parshas Shkalim about the Karbanis is because that's where the half a shekel went to. And so therefore, if they read the Haftarah of Parsha Shkolim about Yoda Kohen, they would all remember that this is all for the Karbanis that were going to be brought. Okay. A new challenge. 1 second. A new challenge. Okay, we've got a new challenge. What's the new challenge? Meisvei. We're challenging it from a brisa. It says as follows. It says in a brisa, Chol liyes b'parsha hasemucha lo. What happens if Rosh Chodesh Adar fell out on a Shabbos, whose regular Torah portion was close to Parsha Shkolim? What does this mean? Okay, so give me 1 second. I'm going to share over here Parshas Kisisa. So if you look over here, it's Tetzaveh followed by Kisisa, right? You first have Tetzaveh, you finish off Parshas Tetzaveh, and then you go into Kisisa. So now the Gemara is asking as follows: what happens if Parshas Shkolim, right, fell out on the Shabbos of Parshas Tetzaveh? Okay, or vice versa, if Shabbos Parshas Shkolim fell out not in Kisisa but in Parshas Vayakel. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about if the Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar fell out either in Parshas Tetzaveh or fell out in Parshas Kisisa, right? So what does the Brisa say? Korin Oisa, they read Shkolim portion on the first Shabbos. The Koiflin Oisa, and they repeat it. Now, this is very ambiguous. It's not very clear what the Brisa is telling us to do. Are we reading in this Shabbos the regular Sedra of the week, Parshas Tetzaveh? And then what? And then we're going to read the portion of Shkolim. Yeah? Okay. What do? We say that we repeat it. Now, what does that mean to repeat it? Does it mean we repeat it the same Shabbos, or does it mean that we repeat it the following Shabbos? But either way, this brisa only makes sense if you would say that Parsha Shkolim is a reading from Kisisa. So there you could have a situation where in Adar, right, the portion of the week might be the Torah reading before Kisisa or the Torah reading after Kisisa, right? However, if you're going to say that Parsha Shkolim refers to reading Parshas Pinchas, this brisa doesn't even begin to make sense, because why would you talk about repeating it, right? There's nothing to repeat. Pinchas never falls out in the month of Adar. That's the question of the Gemara. Let's do it inside. So this brisa could make sense in accordance with Shmuel, who says that Parsha Shkolim is Kisisa. That's how it can happen, that at that time of the year, Parsha Shkolim would fall out in the Shabbos, right, the portion right after, meaning Kisisa, which is right after Parsha Tetzaveh. According to Rav, who says Parsha Shkolim means Parshas Pinchas, right? So now, Misrami Bahu Zimna, does it ever happen, right, that we're going to read Parshas Pinchas, Rosh Chodesh Adar? That never happens. So how could it make sense? How could this brisa make sense in light of Rav's opinion that Parshas Shkolim is Parshas Pinchas? So the Gemara defends Rav, and the Gemara says, you could have such a scenario. What's the case? The Bnei Ma'arava, for the people in the West, the people in Eretz Yisrael, because the people in Eretz Yisrael had a very different custom to people elsewhere in the diaspora. What is their minhag? The maskid l'de'oraisa b'tlashnin. They would complete the Torah reading from Bereshis to V'zos HaBracha once every 3 years, right? So they would divide the reading much different to the way we read it. And so therefore, that being the case, since they only complete it once every 3 years, and so therefore the cycle keeps going around and around. You could have a scenario where one time Parshas Pinchas would fall out on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar. Okay, so you could have, it's plausible to say that such a case could happen, in which case the Baraisa may have been addressing that scenario, that what happens if the Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in the Shabbos just before Parshas Pinchas, right? That's what the Gemara tries to answer with regards to this challenge. Now, the Gemara says, Tanya Kavasa de Shmuel, we have a brisa that's taught in accordance with the view of Shmuel, that what? That we read Parshas Kisisa. What's the brisa? It says, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, Kairin Kisisa, you read Kisisa, and after you read from Yehoyada HaKohen. So here we have a clear brisa that says explicitly like Shmuel and not like Rav. Now, Amar Rav Yitzchok Bar Nafcha. Rav Yitzchok Bar Nafcha says as follows: what happens when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos? How are we going to actually do it? Now that we've basically settled the argument, and we've said that while Rav can defend his position in terms of all the difficulties that we've produced from different brises, we have one final brisa that really comes down and settles the argument in accordance with Shmuel. And that is the brisa that says that on Rosh Chodesh Adar, that falls out on Shabbos, you read Kisisa, and the Haftarah is Yehoyada HaKohen. Now that we've settled it, we want to know what happens, because you're going to have the Parshas HaShavua, you're going to have Rosh Chodesh, and you're going to have Parshas Shkolim. So how do we do it? So that's what the Gemara now discusses. Amar Yitzchok Nafcha says, Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechol Yis B'Shabbos, when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, Mitzi in Shalish Sifrei Torahs, right? Shalish Torahs, V'Karen Behen. You take out 3 Torah scrolls from the Aron HaKodesh, and you read from all 3. Okay. Echad Binyanai Shel Yom. One is with regards to the portion of that day, meaning the portion of the week. The Echad B'Shel Rosh Chodesh, and you read one, which is the portion of Rosh Chodesh from Parshas Pinchas. The Echad and the third Sefer Torah you use B'Kisisa, where you read Parshas Kisisa. That's what Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha says. So that's the halacha, that we take out 3 Sifrei Torah when when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Shabbos, we take out 3 Sifrei Torah. V'amar Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha, and Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha also said, right, that Rosh Chodesh Tevis Shechol Yis B'Shabbos, when Rosh Chodesh Tevis falls out on Shabbos. So what do you have over there? Remember, Chanukah is on the 25th of Kislev. 5 days later is Rosh Chodesh. So you're going to have a Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah together. Now, sometimes Rosh Chodesh can fall out on Shabbos. So you could have an instance where you have Rosh Chodesh Tevis that falls out on Shabbos, which is also Chanukah. So he says that Mevi'in Shalish Teiros V'Karen B'Hem. You take out 3 Teiros and you read from them Echad Binyanai Shel Yom. One with regards to the portion of the day, meaning the regular Sedra, portion of the week. The Echad b'the Rosh Chodesh. One Sefer Torah you're going to use to read from Rosh Chodesh, Parshas Pinchas. The Echad b'Chanukah, and one for Chanukah. Now, why do we take out 3 Sifrei Torah? The reason why we take out 3 Sifrei Torah and we don't roll from one to another, from one portion to another, is because there's something called Tircha D'Tzibura. Tircha D'Tzibura means to trouble and inconvenience the community. And we don't want to inconvenience the community. And even though Parshas Pinchas and Parshas Nosai, which is the reading of Chanukah, are not too far from each other, nevertheless, we still consider it an inconvenience for the community, and we'd rather have 3 separate Sifrei Torah. So now, there's a reason why I'm saying this now, because look at the next piece of the Gemara. The Gemara says, Utsuricha, I need to have both of these teachings of Rabbi Yitzchok Bar Nafcha, because seemingly, why do I need to have both? Once you tell me that Rosh Chodesh Adar that falls out on Shabbos, I take out 3 Torahs because there's 3 different readings. So why can't I automatically know that if the same thing happens again, that you have a Shabbos where you have 3 different portions to read from, that you would take out 3 Sefer Torah? So the Gemara says, I need Rabbi Yitzchok Nafka to tell me both halachas. Why? The Itma Baha, because if we had only said this with regards to Rosh Chodesh Tevis that falls out on Shabbos, right? Then I would have said Bahak Rabbi Yitzchak. Only in regards to this instance does Rabbi Yitzchak say that you need to bring out you need to bring out 3 scrolls, right? Why? Because over there we don't have a question about which portion to read or not. You're going to definitely be reading from Parshas Pinchas. You're going to be definitely reading the Parshas Shavua, and you're going to definitely be reading from Parshas Nosai. Aval Bahach. But in this case, in regards to Rosh Chodesh that falls out on Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh Adar that falls out on Shabbos, right? I would think that maybe Kerav Svirale. Maybe he holds like Rav. The Amma that he says Parshas Shkolim is Korbani Lachmi. That Parshas Shkolim is from Parshas Pinchas, and therefore Ubshtei Torah Sagi. It would be enough to have only 2 Sifrei Torah. Why? Why? Again, if I'm going to come along and say that Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha said that when Rosh Chodesh Tevis falls out on Shabbos Chanukah, then you take out 3 Sifrei Torah, and he wouldn't say anything about Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, then I would assume the reason why he doesn't say anything about Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar is because he holds that you only have to bring out 2 Sifrei Torah on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar. Why? Because he doesn't hold like Shmuel, he holds like Rav, who holds that on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar you read from Parshas Pinchas, not from Parshas Kisisa. Kamash Malon. Therefore, we have 2 statements from one second. Sorry. Yeah. So therefore, we have 2 statements from Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha, who tells us that both on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Tevis and Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, you take out 3 Sifrei Torah to know that he rules with Shmuel and not like Rav. Okay, right? The Gemara, that's fine. I understand why you need to have both. You need to have Rosh Chodesh Tevis, right, that falls out on Shabbos, and Rosh Chodesh Adar that falls out on Shabbos. Because if I would have only said Rosh Chodesh Tevis, I wouldn't have known Rosh Chodesh Adar. Right? The Gemara, v'lei mahav, v'loi bayahach. So then, just tell me about Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar and don't mention anything about Tevis, right? So the Gemara answers, Chan Miklal Chaverta Itma. The truth is, Rabbi Yitzchok only said one of them. He didn't say both of them. He only said about Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar. He never said anything about Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Tevis. It is us who derive from his statement about Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar that the same would apply on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Tevis. But he himself, he didn't say anything about Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Tevis, right? Which would be Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Chanukah, right? He didn't say anything about that. We just derive from the fact that he said this about Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar that the same would apply. That you'd have to take out 3 Sifrei Torah not to keep the people waiting. So far, so good. Okay. Itmar. So it was taught as follows: Chodesh Tevis Shechol Yis B'chol. What happens when Rosh Chodesh Tevis falls out on a weekday? So how do we go about reading the Torah? Okay, Rabbi Yitzchok says, Karut Lasab Rosh Chodesh. 3 people should be called up for the Rosh Chodesh passage from Parshas Pinchas. And then you do Hagba, you roll up the Torah, then you take out the next Torah, and then you call up the last guy, V'chad B'Chanukah, and one guy would read the portion from Parshas Nosai about Chanukah, right? That the reading for Chanukah. That's according to Rabbi Yitzchok. Rav Dimi, but according to Rav Dimi, the Min Haifa, who's from Haifa, Omar, he said, no, it's the other way around. Karu Telasa B'Chanukah. 3 people should read the portion of Chanukah, right? V'chad, and the last guy should read the 4th Aliyah Rosh Chodesh from Rosh Chodesh, right? So you call up 3 people, they read from Parshas Nosai, then you do Hagba, and then you lift up the Torah and you roll it up, you bring out the next Torah, and then the 4th guy gets called up for Rosh Chodesh. So now, with regards to these two opinions, we have commentary. Amar Rav Mani says, that the opinion of Yitzchok Nafcha, this Rabbi Yitzchok that we mentioned, makes more sense. It's more logical. Why? Because we have a principle, the Todeh v'she'ene Todeh, when something is more frequent and something that is less frequent, then Todeh Kaidem, the more frequent thing takes precedence, right? So, for example, right, this is something that you see often. When Shabbos and Yom Tov fall out on the same day, which means the Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, when you greet somebody, you say, Good Shabbos, Good Yom Tov. You don't say Good Yom Tov, Good Shabbos. You say Good Shabbos, Good Yom Tov. That's the same principle of Todeh v'she'ena Todeh, Todeh Kaidem. The one that is more frequent and the one that is less frequent, the one that is more frequent takes precedence, right? So here we're saying, if we have Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah falling out on the same day, what happens more often? Rosh Chodesh or Chanukah? It's Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, read the first three people called up should be reading from Rosh Chodesh, and then the fourth should be called up for Chanukah, right? Amar Rav Avin says no. Kvasi de Rav Dimi mistabra, that the opinion of Rav Dimi makes more sense. Why? Because mi garam l'revi sheyavai. Who caused that the first person should come up to read from the Torah? It's Rosh Chodesh, as we learned previously in the Gemara, that on Rosh Chodesh we call up 4, but on a regular day we only call up 3. So since Rosh Chodesh is the reason why we call up the 4th Aliyah, so Hilkach, therefore, Revi b'Rosh Chodesh by Mikra. Therefore, the 4th person should be the one to read the Rosh Chodesh passage. So since this issue is unresolved, the Gemara cites the view of the Amora and Mayhava Allah. What's the outcome of this matter? Rav Yosef says, "A mashkichim b'Rosh Chodesh." We do not concern ourselves with Rosh Chodesh, which means the primary reading is that of Chanukah, and so Chanukah should come first, and then Rosh Chodesh should come after. But Rabba says, "A mashkichim b'Chanukah." We don't concern ourselves about Chanukah, and so therefore the primary reading is Rosh Chodesh, and then we should read Chanukah v'Hilchasa, and the halacha is Emashkichim b'Chanukah. We do not concern ourselves with Chanukah, Rosh Chodesh Ikka, and therefore the main reading is Rosh Chodesh, and that's the halacha. That what we do is we first, when it falls out on Rosh Chodesh, when Chanukah falls out on Rosh Chodesh, and it's during the week, first we read the Rosh Chodesh reading, and then we read the Chanukah reading. And we
Rabbi, question.
Yes.
So we're saying Rosh Chodesh first because we would normally read it 12 or 13 times a year, whereas Hanukkah we only read it 8.
That's correct.
So what happens in a situation where you have 2 events where they're both equal in number?
Well,
I know we don't.
Right, then it would be a question. But the question is resolved over here because that's not the case. But it's a good question. What happens if you have 2 things equal? So then you'd have to find something in one of them that has a particular advantage that would make it outweigh the other. You'd have to find out what's special about one over the other to give it precedence.
Okay.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Well, Shabbat takes precedence over everything. So to make the comparison that Shabbat, takes precedence more over Rosh Chodesh or any of the other Yontifs, I mean, it's a non sequitur because Shabbos always takes precedence over everything. That shouldn't even be made as a comparison, it seems.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
What I'm saying, Shabbat is more important based on importance, not precedence.
That's not necessarily true. Look at the Shabbat. Look at the Shabbat Chol HaMoed. Shabbat Chol HaMoed, for whatever the holiday is, you normally read a special portion for that Chol HaMoed. You don't read.
But that's the
exception.
exception. The week. Right, you're right, but that's the exception, not the rule. And we have to have a special Mishnah, our Mishnah, who actually says that. Right, that's the exception, not the rule. But when all things are equal, then we apply the principle of Tadeh v'she'ena Tadeh Kodim. right? And here we're not even talking about replacing. We're talking about we're going to read both. We're going to read for Rosh Chodesh, and we're going to read for Hanukkah. The question is, which one do we start with? Which one takes precedence? And so therefore we say Tadir v'sheina Tadir. But what you're referring to now in terms of Shabbos is about a complete replacement, and that's for a reason. We do replace it for a reason. But here we're saying when you're going to have both of them anyway, which one is going to be read first? You give precedence to the one that is more regular than the other.
Thanks. All
right.
Like Talis and Tefillin. Talis and Tefillin. Same thing.
That what?
Talis and Tefillin. We put the talis first on before the Tefillin. Which one is more important? The Tefillin is more important than the talis. But because we put the talis on Shabbos and not Tefillin on Shabbos, it makes the talis more sacred to put on first.
Okay. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
So thank you, Rabbi.
Good day, guys.